Hello and welcome back to Hudson Auto Films. Today is something a little bit different as I'm not feeling too well. I've been out of action for the last week, so unfortunately I haven't been able to make any progress on the 4x4 Aston. However, I thought instead I'd like to do a 2024 recap, go over all the builds that we've started, the ones we've finished, the ones we've failed to finish, the ones which are ongoing, and all that's in between. Followed by a quick Q&A. I asked you guys to ask me questions on the YouTube community section, and a bunch of you did, so we'll do that at the end of the video. I'd also like to talk about what's next for the builds, for the channel overall, and yeah, just an overall roundup of the last year. With the future of this channel in mind, I'd like to quickly mention I've introduced a new £1, $1 tier on the Patreon. Obviously, the beauty of YouTube is it's free, but where car content differs from a lot of content on YouTube is the cost in making it. I've been really fortunate recently to get a few sponsors, which has made all the difference, has allowed me to move quicker on this build. I'm sure you've all seen how much the sponsorship over the last couple of months has been able to impact the build. Obviously, it's gone from something which was a complete mess to really the final stretch, which is awesome. So like I said, I've introduced a £1/ $1 tier on the Patreon, which basically gives you early access, behind the scenes content, input into choices I'm making during the build. But really ultimately what it would bring is more security to this channel and allow me to continue uploading every week. This isn't a money grab. Please don't give any money that you don't have. This is just the reality of the situation. I'm very much looking into the new year. I'd like to take this as seriously as I can because I'm loving making this content. But regardless of whether you want to help on that side or not, I'm just grateful that you are watching. But anyway, let's begin the year's recap. We kicked off 2024 with probably the most controversial build of the year, and it would have to be pretty controversial when a 4x4 Aston kind of pales in comparison. Of course, I'm talking about the Bullet. Okay, so with this newfound optimism I've got, I've decided to attach the fuel lines again. Very, very dodgy set. Well, no, it's not dodgy actually. These are not fuel grade, but I just want to see if the fuel pump works. I'm pretty sure it doesn't work, but this is how we're going to find out. That is a monster. Bloody hell. So I suppose the question is, what is next for the Bullet? Well, everything that makes it a Bullet is still just sitting around the back in storage. I did attempt to scrap the shell, but the weigh-in cost was so pointless that I ended up not scrapping it. So I still have every component of the Bullet. The thing with that build was stripping it was essential. We needed to know just how bad the rot was. But what we uncovered was definitely far worse than I think I had imagined. And the thing with welding something like that is it's very different to welding kind of a box section chassis. It is more advanced, and I don't claim to be an expert at any sort of welding. And the thing with that chassis is, yes, you could patch it up, but it would never truly be safe. And for anyone who's heavily patched up a monocoque body, you will know once you do that, they never quite move the same. They never corner the same. They never just quite feel right. And that's because obviously you've changed the relationship between how everything marries up. What really stopped that build was money, the total mess that we uncovered, which was far more than I could have ever imagined. And we obviously discussed a lot of ideas, and at that point in time I wanted to move forward with putting the body panels on a Reliant scimitar. But now really what I'm looking for is just a rolling shell Capri. Especially after kind of reviewing the footage, I think it is what it is. I really appreciate what it is, even though it is a complete ridiculous machine. It's such a moment in the 70s, 80s where this was what people did, and I think that's awesome. And I think if anything, it's a shame to chop it up and put it on a scimitar. And a lot of you probably think it's more of a shame to chop up the scimitar. I think it's more of a shame to chop up the bullet. There's only kind of a handful of them left. So yeah, basically I'm looking for a rolling shell of a Capri. I'd then like to basically repair the bodywork, mount it in a less 1980s way with less newspaper and filler and foam, and then just have a silly, fun car to drive around in. If this is something you'd like to see on the channel again, do let me know. Maybe we'll do a kind of a poll on the community section. It's something I'm going to do regardless, but I'm not sure if it's kind of had its moment on YouTube. I know it was kind of a little bit of a Marmite sort of build. Some of you guys really liked it and thought it captured the 80s. A lot of you hated it. But, you know, it caused discussion, which I think is always good. So yeah, let me know what you think. Soon after this, we embarked on a special one-off project that a lot of you didn't actually watch, so I'd highly recommend watching it. For Father's Day, my wife and I decided to turn my father's Reliant Robin from kind of a half-finished, abandoned art car into a finished art car. The car had sat for a very long time, it didn't run, the bodywork wasn't finished. So in one episode, we got the car running, which was an absolute nightmare, and Leah did her crazy art all over it, and then we surprised my dad with it for Father's Day. This was a really fun build. Like I said though, it was incredibly hard to get the Reliant engine to run properly. You'd think with an engine like that, everything would be quite straightforward, and in theory it was, but it just was a bit unhappy. It was everything that could have gone wrong to make that car work did. But it runs, it drives, it's looking amazing, and yeah, Dad was really pleased with it. So yeah, please do go check out that episode. It's a fun one.
Oh, God, that's brilliant. That is unbelievable.
That's fantastic.
That is absolutely unbelievable. Wow.
Oh, that's over.
What a brilliant, God, what a brilliant finish on that. That is terrific.
It's cool, isn't it?
Oh, Paul! Oh my God!
As you can see, it was quite a tricky time for me space-wise. This last year has been a massive learning curve on what it means to build cars for YouTube, kind of to make videos on them. Beforehand, I'd had loads of cars always on the go. I'd tinker on them when I wanted to, and over time, they'd progressively get done. The second I applied YouTube to the mix, where I had to have a video out every week or every 2 weeks, you suddenly realize you have to just focus on one car, which, as you can tell, is what I transitioned into doing midway through 2024. I think when the channel started to grow a little bit, I also felt a pressure to get more cars, not only because I realized sometimes things go wrong on builds and you need something to fill that space, but also because I wanted to keep people interested. But I realize now, especially at the level I'm at, just one build at a time is really important, and if there is another build, it's just something small, and primarily that's a mixture due to time pressures, but largely finances. It's hard enough to build one car on a YouTube timeline, let alone multiple. I'm sure this will change over time as the channel grows and as, you know, it becomes more financially stable as a thing in itself. I definitely do see there being a perfect balance where I have a couple of cars on the go, because, for example, I see with the 4x4 Aston, we're approaching a time where there's going to be very slow progress. Well, not massively slow, but you know, you're not going to see a massive progress in a week. For example, the chassis work, that's going to be time consuming, and the end result is going to be barely noticeable from a kind of a camera point of view, but it's going to be really time consuming to do. So it's moments like that where I think having a secondary build would be brilliant. But it's just budget limited really at the moment. I've got so many ideas and cool projects that I would like to introduce to the channel. But yeah, we'll get there eventually. Next up for our recap is indeed the 4x4 Aston. Certainly the most involved build you have seen me undertake. Like I said, midway through 2024, I decided just to drop everything and focus on this build. Ultimately, it's what I wanted to build more than anything at that time. It's what I felt I could build. And also from a financial point of view, I had a vast amount of the key components. So I already knew I kind of had everything I needed for the first 5 episodes, say. But yeah, let's have a recap and take a look at this build so far. So what is next for the 4x4 Aston? Well, I'd say we are in the final stretch. Isaac and I were talking the other day, and what's interesting is arguably the hardest work has been done. The concept has proven it works. But though the hardest work is done, the most time-consuming work is still to come. So on Sunday, we'll have a bit of fun fabrication, making the fuel can holder for the back, the survival pack sort of thing. But then we go into the disassembly. So basically, the Aston body has to come up, the Landrover chassis has to be rolled out. Then we'll take the Landrover chassis, completely clean it up. So pressure wash the whole thing, pressure wash the engine, get everything gleaming as much as it can. And this is where things get very time consuming. We're going to have to wire wheel the whole chassis down, exposing any rust. There is some very obvious and quite nasty rust, kind of in this kind of rear third, which is going to have to be addressed. Then once that's all welded up, which is going to be a nightmare, paint the whole chassis, protect it, new suspension, new bushes, all of that sort of thing. And simultaneously, whilst that's happening, I'll be prepping the whole Aston body. We obviously have to get that other rear quarter on, which is going to be quite a complex job as I can't find one. So I'm having to buy one from a hardtop, which is still £600, which is more than I paid for the Landrover Discovery and more than I paid for the Aston. In fact, £600 is more than I paid for the cars combined, which is kind of crazy. But anyway, we're having to get a hardtop rear quarter, modify it to be a Volante rear quarter, which is going to be quite a big job. Get 2 new doors, do all the bodywork for the shell, make proper mounts for the steering and pedal system, run brake lines, all that sort of thing across the shell. Yeah, it's going to be a huge job, especially as those are both running simultaneously. And yeah, they're going to be it's going to be really time consuming, and certain things which might make up just kind of 1 minute of a video might take days. So yeah, it's quite a tricky stage coming up. But then once that's all done, we'll marry them up. And once everything's aligned, I will paint the Aston body in its final colour, which we'll talk a little bit about in the Q&A. Then it's time to plumb everything in properly, which means new lines, new brakes, new everything. It's going to be kind of crazy, but now is the time to do it. Then in theory, once that's done, it is time for electrics and then interior. Electrics I'm a bit up in the air on. There's kind of 2 phases to the electrics. There's one which is getting the car running, driving and happy, which is quite straightforward. The much more involved stage is getting it so it's road legal. The electrics are basically the only thing which concern me about it being road legal, though it's 100% possible and for many people very easy. Wiring is something I don't like at all. So I'm not sure if for the sake of your sanity, what will happen is we'll kind of wire the car up so it runs, drives. So we'll complete the car. So visually it's all done, mechanically it's all done, electrically it runs, drives, drifts around on dirt, all that sort of thing. But then whilst I'm embarking on another build, in the background I can be tinkering around over a couple of months, getting the electrics fully road legal in time for summer, and then kind of catch you up on the full electric system. I don't know, let me know what you think. It's just, I can't completely wire this thing up to road legal standards in a week or 2. It's going to be a huge job. And then the car is done, its first iteration at least. Obviously, you know, project car is never done, and I'm sure further down the line, it might get a new engine and all that sort of thing, but I'd really like just to enjoy it in its kind of V1 state. That would be really exciting. And then I'd like to take on a massive road trip and really get to know the car and get to know what bits I like, what I don't, what needs changing, what works well and what doesn't. We are in discussions about a kind of major road trip across a few countries in it. So we will see how that shapes up, but that would be very cool and certainly a very daunting and effective way to test it out. So I'd like to think kind of in February, March, we'll be wrapping this thing up and it'll be time for the next build. Before we wrap this thing up and go into the Q&A, I'd like to mention a few other honourable mentions and discuss a car which I'm sure a few of you are wondering where it is. First of all, a little nod to the Suzuki build we did a couple of weeks ago. This is Isaac's bike, he was given it. It had been unfortunately used and messed about with, and by the time he got it, it was in a bit of a sad state. We completely dismantled it, cleaned everything, We're very keen to keep the patina and not really go too involved in this build because it is what it is. It was just fun, and we cleaned it all up, painted some things, did all the gaskets, made it mechanically happy, put it back together, and then we were off. It was a great little episode, so I do recommend watching it. Another honourable mention is the 1970 DBS. I did make a video about this, but this is the first car that was ever on the channel, and that left in, I think it might be January or February of this year. It was a great car. I talk all about it in that video where it's leaving, but essentially it wasn't the car for me. It wasn't the DBS that I had dreamt of. It wasn't the right model, it didn't have the right front, it was the later V8 car, and I was putting all this work into it, and it wasn't the right car, basically. Not to mention all these things were starting to happen with YouTube, all these other projects. Someone came along, a price was achieved that made no sense at the time, and I couldn't refuse it. It's now gone to a good home. I saw the owner a few weeks ago. He was picking up some parts, and yeah, I hope to show it on the channel once it's done. I know he's going to do a pretty amazing restoration on it. But now the car, which I think a lot of people are confused where it is, the absolutely obliterated Aston Martin DBS. I found this car in a woodyard, and it was completely trashed. Across a couple of months, you watched me strip it, you watched Isaac and I brace it up, watched us straighten it. It was obviously completely bent, all sorts of things. It was an amazing experience being able to tackle an Aston that rusty. The reality is it was too far gone. I had people telling me in the comments all the time it was too far gone. I had Aston specialists reaching out who had built many cars, and they said they wouldn't even touch a car like that. They would just build a new chassis. Again, like we talked about in the Bullet, if I'd welded it all up, it would never quite have been right still. A bunch of things happened, and due to quite an unusual reason, some private medical care had to be sought due to the massive timing issues of free medical care and all that sort of thing. So suddenly there was this huge cost in my life, and I couldn't actually physically work on the car for a few months. And simultaneously, someone reached out with kind of crazy deal. They basically said, we don't want any of the body panels, none of it. We just want the rotten bit in the middle and the ID. We'll give you this amount of money, you can keep all the body panels, and here is a gleaming MGB Roadster as well. And at the time, I just couldn't say no. I needed the money for the medical stuff, which, you know, health always has to take priority. The last few years has really taught me your health and the people you care about's health is more important than anything else, really. So this situation aligned, and they came. The last thing you guys saw was this chap chopping the roof off and the rotten innards going. Basically, what they're going to do is they use the ID and they completely cut and reform the chassis, and they're turning it into a DB4 GT, I believe. That is probably wrong. So that is where the chassis went. So basically, I still have all of the body panels, the interior, the roof, the doors, like everything. So many mechanical components are everywhere. So I'm looking for a new donor chassis. I have found one. I'm talking to them. Again, it's all kind of finance based, but I would like to bring that to the channel in 2025 if I can. It's a very solid chassis, and everything it lacks I have from the other one, which is kind of the situation I wanted. So yeah, depending on how YouTube revenue goes, that will be coming back to the channel in a far more realistic format. So apologies for that. I didn't want to mention it until I knew I kind of had things lined up to bring it back. So DBS is returning, but yeah, it was quite an endeavour. So last but not least, the little Lancia. No real updates. I thought I'd have an update to give you, you know, for all sorts of reasons. But right now it is just sitting behind the barn. I'm not really sure what the future holds for that car. Again, I'm being very strict and trying to prioritise one build at a time, and the builds that are exciting to me, as you need to be excited to sustain the build. Lancias and the Beta do excite me, but I've got my blinders on. They need to be whilst I finish this next build. But there we go, that wraps up 2024 in cars. It's been such an interesting year for me. I've learned so much, not only about actually working on cars. The more you do these things, the more you learn, but just time management, YouTube, life work balance, all of this sort of thing. It's been such a year full of learning. So like I mentioned, I put out a post saying, ask me your questions, and I'm going to answer them now. Question number 1, what gave you the idea to create such a monster, a Land Rover with an Aston body on top? Also get well soon. Thank you. Astons are my favourite mark of car. Land Rovers are probably a close second, if not even. To be honest, about a year prior, I had a immaculate DB9 body I got off eBay, and I wanted to turn it into a DBR9 replica, not a functioning car, but like a big piece of art. So I got this immaculate tub, and it was sitting around the back of the barn, which is also where I keep a bunch of old wheels, mainly for Land Rovers. I've had so many Land Rovers over the years. So it was sitting around the back of the barn, and I think me and a friend just kind of rolled a couple of wheels next to it. It was just the tub of this DB9. So we just put these Land Rover wheels next to it, and kind of that was that. I didn't think too much of it. At the time, I had no interest in doing it with that Aston body because it was an immaculate DB9 shell. It was absolutely perfect. But eventually, when I saw the Vantage body for sale, which had sustained damage, could be nothing but, you know, chopped up. There was not one part of it which was indented. So it was just, it was destined to be crushed, really, not even chopped up. I kind of thought I'd like to put this back on the road because I hate scrap, I hate wastage. And it's an Aston, it's still an Aston. So I was looking at the wheelbase and what was similar, and I saw a Land Rover wheelbase was similar. Obviously, we've kind of found that it's amazing how much a couple of inches makes a difference, no pun intended. But what seemed like a small discrepancy has actually been quite a challenge to overcome on this build. But yeah, I was looking at all sorts of chassis, but I definitely didn't want to put it on a low tube chassis because then it would just be a fake Aston. Whereas now it's obviously an Aston, but it's obviously not an Aston at the same time, it's a Land Rover. So yeah, it came around from just messing around, a bit of madness, and I couldn't bear to see the Aston just be crushed. I couldn't bear to see the Discovery just be scrapped. So, you know, like I said in the first episode, can we make one good car out of 2 cars which are destined for, you know, to be turned into Coke cans? And we're almost there. Next question. Will car have a tea making facility on board? And if not, 1, it should, and 2, why the bloody hell not? Well, it actually will. Like I mentioned, we're going to take it on a mega road trips, and the most essential part of my diet is tea. So there will be a kettle and a Yorkshire tea, which is my preferred brand of choice, set up in the back. Okay, next question. A couple of people asked a similar one to this. Knowing it's convertible, will you be adding a roof, or will you be making the interior weatherproof? Good question. I would love to get an actual V8 Vantage roof. Unfortunately, they're about £2,000, which is just so far out of budget. Not only that is, I'm not sure how complex it would be to make it work without the Aston computers. I assume it would need some sort of computer, but whether the roof computer could be operated on its own without the rest of the Aston support computers, I'm not sure. Maybe one of you guys can tell me, but I'd love to have an Aston roof. Is it realistic? Probably not. How did you acquire your mechanical and fabrication skills? What is your day job? Well, I'm not sure I've got any mechanical or fabrication skills. But everything you see me do in this channel is things I've learned just over the years of messing around with cars and watching YouTube videos, basically. My first car was a Land Rover Defender. This was back when you could get a Defender for 1,500 quid, which seems like a pretty magical time. So yeah, when I was a teenager, I would take that apart in the evening after school and then have to figure out how to put it back together in time for school the next day. So that was kind of my first baptism into working on cars. I'd always loved cars, but I'd never touched them until that Land Rover. Unfortunately, I sold that Land Rover because I needed the money a couple of years ago. I'd like to buy it back one day. Then after that, I endeavoured into Land Rover restoration and buying and selling and importing and exporting. And that became my life for a couple of years. So I learned a lot of that skill during that time, I suppose. What is your day job? I was making music for a long time. That was my main pursuit, which I still do. but I moved over more to the management side. So I help with artist management, including my wife Leah, who you guys saw a couple of videos ago. She's had a really brilliant career in music and film and stuff like that. So I help with that. I also have a mental health tech startup, which my good friend and I started about a year ago, which we're trying to build. That is called Mend. I'll leave a link to that below if you want to check it out. So yeah, a bit of an eclectic mix. Next question. Is the car top heavy? If so, what are you going to do about it? Will you have a roll cage? The car really isn't very top heavy. Obviously the Aston body is so much lighter than the Landrover body, so it feels a lot more planted than the Landrover. All the weight from the engine and the chassis are very level with the wheels. And the Aston body, I'd say, is a pretty similar weight to them. So actually, the centre of gravity is pretty good. In terms of a roll cage, I think it needs one eventually. I don't think it will have one in V1. I think it'll have a little kind of roll cage behind the seats, but not kind of a big system. But kind of similar to the roof, maybe that's something we'll have to consider further down the line. Maybe a roll cage cum roof system will be integrated, but we'll see. How is your dad getting on with the Reliant? Well, he likes it very much. It is sitting in the garage at home. I do need to lacquer it. It does kind of scare me, the idea of him driving it. Dad is 80 in June. It scares me, the idea of even me driving it sounds incredibly daunting. So I personally prefer it being an ornament, but Dad's got other ideas. Have you decided on a colour yet for the Aston? It would look good in British Racing Green. Well, to be honest, British Racing Green right now is my top choice. Earlier on, I'd thought white, and I'd kind of wanted to go for a bit of an Arctic theme. But I think British Racing Green might be the winner, but let me know what you think. Not sure if you want to share, but what condition are you suffering from? It seems like something that comes and goes. Sure, it's something I don't like to talk about too much because there's people with far worse things going on in their life, but I have ME/CFS, which is a bit of a strange condition, impacts everybody differently, and a lot of people have, used and abused that diagnosis in the past. But basically, for me, it means my ability, energy-wise and fatigue, is massively up and down. So I sometimes am pretty incapable of doing a lot of things, which is tricky. Other times I am able. It's very up and down. As you've seen kind of across this channel, there's been periods where I've been raring to go and then I've had to disappear. It's life. I've had it for like maybe 5 years. In theory, when you get it when you're young, there's a much higher chance that you'll grow out of it. But there's nothing you can really do about it. You just kind of have to get on. Like I said, there's people with far worse things going on, so it is what it is. It's more frustrating than anything. It limits what I can do at times, but that's life. Next question: what's been your favourite car to work on so far, and what classics would you love to own? My favourite car to work on probably has been this, followed by, I used to have a Ford Capri. It was just a 2-litre laser, but it was just awesome. It just worked. It was easy to work on. There was a lot of space in the engine bay. It was just a great car. And what classics would I love to own? I really would like a daily driver kind of resto mod DBS. That is something I really crave. Other cars I'd love to own. To be honest, right now, that's the only car I really would love to own. There's a bunch of builds I'd like to do, completely custom things like that. But in terms of existing classic cars, it would be some sort of resto mod DBS. Do you have any plans for the 4x4 Aston when it's finished? Yes, to drive it and enjoy it and take it on a massive road trip. Will anything come of the DBS project? That's the one I sub for. Like I mentioned, it is coming back, don't worry. I just had to be realistic about what I'm trying to achieve, what I'm trying to build, and what I can do within my ability, and that chassis was just not right. But luckily now we have a massive DBS parts division. We just need that right chassis. So hopefully I can secure that in the next few months. Finances dependent. What do you plan to use this incredible machine for once it's finished? Just driving it around just to town, I think. Honestly, road trips and just nipping to Tesco. Any plans to widen the track? It looks quite skinny considering how tall it is. It doesn't look very skinny in real life, but yes, I will need to mess around a little bit and put spacers on it because when the front wheels turn, the massive tyres do interfere a little bit with the chassis, so we'll need to mess around with that. But also on the kind of height side of things, we are going to be lowering it. So when the body is off and I restore the chassis, it will be getting lowering springs. So that will certainly help with the kind of overall way everything sits, but also you've got to remember, because the Aston body is lighter, the suspension geometry is no longer what it was. Putting lowering springs in, if anything, should correct the geometry to be closer to what it should have been. Obviously the lighter body is meaning the suspension is riding higher, which means arms and everything are sitting in a slightly strange position, so lowering springs should sort all of that. This is what James Bond would drive if he had a mullet. His name was James Bondo. I like that. I have been thinking about getting a mullet, but yeah, let me know. eBay Turbo. I'm not sure. I feel like the odds are already stacked against this engine, so we shouldn't give it any more. Someone said, can it play Doom? Unfortunately, I don't know what Doom is. I'm not very hip. Well, there we go. I hope that answered some of your questions and that you enjoyed the recap of the last year. It has been such a crazy year, and I feel overall a lot has been achieved. I can't believe this thing actually exists and is more than just a kind of silly idea. Thank you so much for your support across the last year. It's been awesome to build this community and have so much support from you guys and like-minded people who think building things like this is a good idea, because it can be quite hard to find those people. But like I mentioned, there is so much to come in the new year. I'm so excited. I've got so many ideas that I really want to build. You know, this is just the beginning. So I really hope I can achieve some of that in the new year. Like I said, please do check out the Patreon below. I'm really trying to build that so the channel can have more of a foundation and I can give it more time and just, yeah, build all this crazy stuff and show you guys. Yeah, that'd be really cool. So please do check out the Patreon. But regardless, thank you so much for your support and watching this video and all the videos and just all the support over the last year. It's really fantastic. So thank you so much. So I'll probably see you on Sunday for some light fabrication to the back end of the 4x4 Aston. But until then, I hope you've had a lovely Christmas and have a fantastic New Year's. And I'll see you in the new year. So this is Charlie from Hudson Auto Films signing off for 2024. So I'll see you next year.